just arrived
in Hoboken, New Jersey.
right, in a big ship, and you stayed on the ship.
The name of the ship was the Nea Hellas,
Right.
which came from Greece. Yes.
From Greece, exactly.
Right.
And the last thing we heard about was that you stayed on the ship for Shabbos because your father refused to get off the ship, despite all the begging and whatever.
Right.
And then eventually, when you came to Hoboken, where you were supposed to meet someone, there was nobody there.
Exactly.
And now what happened?
And now what happened, it's very hazy because evidently my father managed to arrive where we were meant to go, which was in the not upper, but middle west side, near the West Side Synagogue. The Rav there was a Rabbi Herbert Goldstein, very, very well known, first American-born Rav, really, who did a great deal for refugees who were coming in en masse at that time. And I think that probably he arranged for a rented apartment for the time till we would find our land legs, so to say. And the next thing my father found out was that the Yekisha community of refugees settled in Washington Heights, which also was Breuer's, Rabbi Breuer's main shul, and it was also YU's buildings.
Oh, okay.
YU's buildings were, Breuer was on the one side of Washington Heights, and across the way, let's say 5 or 6 avenues over, was YU's large buildings, not of course what they have today, but their main beautiful old building, yes. And my father did not want to go to Breuer's shul because he was not a true blue Yekker. So he went to the, but not a shtibel exactly, because it was Litvish, so it wasn't really a shtibel, but the shul of the YU campus, and Rabbi Soloveichik very often davened in that shul, and my father was very enamored of Rabbi Soloveichik. And since I'm on that subject...
How old was Rabbi Soloveichik at that point?
Not old yet.
Not old, right?
No,
yeah.
No. But what I do remember also of that is that every Thursday evening we went to Manhattan, from Washington Heights to the lower part of Manhattan, where Rabbi Soloveichik gave his, I guess, Erev Shabbos almost, shir in Yiddish. My father sat there glued to the seat, and my mother and I, who didn't understand anything, were upstairs in the ladies' gallery, and he spoke in Yiddish.
Yeah.
At that time, he spoke in Yiddish. And what I did gather was that he was quite sharp with people who asked questions. You know this? Yes.
From my father.
Oh, yes, quite sharp with me. I always was saying, I didn't understand, but I could see, oh my goodness. I wouldn't ask a question in that shir. Anyway, but what was the big deal? Why did we go also? Because the one glatt kosher restaurant at that time, we're talking maybe the late 40s, the late 40s. There was a Schreiber restaurant run by Mr. Schreiber that was glatt kosher, very elegant, with white tablecloths and lovely real silver and all this. And after the shir, we would go down there and have a very nice fleischig meal. So I throw that in because we mentioned Rabbi Soloveichik. And after he gave that shir, he would go to Boston.
To Boston?
Yeah. That's where he was the Rav.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
And not only that, I think he was the founder of the Rambam Yeshiva in Boston, Yesodi school. Anyway, and then he would commute. That's where he lived. He lived in Boston. alongside of the Bostoner Rebbe. And they were quite good friends. Okay, this is by the way. These were early years. My father found his, what should I say, niche early on because he was brought over from Israel by a company that wanted to hire him. So he right away had a set position. And English was a language he didn't speak it fluent. He spoke it fluently, but it's like my talking Hebrew straight out of the Chumash. That kind of English. And he wrote beautiful letters in English. And I think partially his expertise, maybe I should mention, he was a traffic director of the Bentheim company called Philip Brothers. This is all early Americana from people.
Right.
And the people who owned it were the Bentheims. And my father became traffic. What did that mean?
Yeah, what did that mean?
It meant Bentheim was in the business of bringing in hard metals, iron ore. And shipping was a big part of that. It came in, I imagine, maybe from Africa. I have no idea where it really came from. And my father was in charge of insurance for the shipping, meaning if there was a storm, he had to know. If there was a dock worker strike, he had to be aware of. And accordingly, he organized the insurance for it. So anyway, this was his expertise, and he already did that in Germany, same kind of thing.
Right. That's what I remember you said, that he was dealing with metal in Germany already.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so he was set up, so to say. He had his shul, he had the weekday work, and it was left to my mother and myself to find our way.
Right.
And that is why I am ma'arich about the refugee status. Because it's good for children to know what it means to be refugees, because we have in Israel many times Ukrainians, Ethiopians, people come, and we should have a listening ear, a helping hand for people like that. Because when we came, there was a Hadassa existing in New York, but
Maybe
they
explain what that case was.
a Hadassa was like the joint, which was a helping hand to Jewish people, whether they were Americans or not. And at that time, they did not do anything for us. We were on our own. And later on, they were very helpful when many more people came. And so the first thing that happened is I went to a school, PS 189 in Washington Heights, and they didn't know what to do with all these basically German Jewish refugees. And
This
so
was a public school?
public school, yeah. And
PS, right.
public school, PS,
Yeah.
right. And they put us into something they called a C class. So now it wasn't ABC actually.
Oh, okay.
It was that they didn't know what to call us. They could have called us the special English class, but they decided to call us a C class. And in my class, we had all these really bright Jewish kids. And we were in a neighborhood that was populated at the time by Irish, Italian Catholics. And while I don't want to say one disparaging word,
Yeah.
they didn't measure up to,
Shocking.
yes. So I was Mrs. Middle Class, middle brains, middle everything, but with us we had some really bright kids. And they thought that they would keep the C class going for years and years and years. We'd advance little by little, but instead, everybody learned fluent English in 3 months' time.
Wow.
And yeah, when you're forced into a language, you have to do that.
Right.
That's why Russian refugees to Israel learn Hebrew very fast, because not too many people spoke Russian when they first arrived.
Mm.
So we had to learn really fast, and we wanted to learn. We were eager to be among normalcy, and we. I can only say that they didn't know what to do. At the end of 3 months, everybody was caught up with their algebra or whatever they taught at that time. Everybody knew English, and then they were stuck with budgets for that class.
Oh.
And what do? And you don't know what to do with us. Right. So little by little, some of us drifted out anyhow. And my biggest disaster in graduating PS 189 was you had to be in homemaking, and you had to make your graduation class.
What? We have a lot of... We're back.
And it was one of those awful white-colored things.
You had to make a dress for
You had to sew it yourself. So it was just a disaster. I kept spoiling the material over and over again. Finally, my poor mother had to give it to a seamstress so I should be able to graduate with honors from this class. And then they
Oh, and this is something you learned in school,
yeah,
supposedly.
right. That was
you were supposed
right.
To know how to do
of course,
it.
of course. Now, they also had home cooking.
Okay.
I was a disaster at all these things. And then there was one more thing, gym.
Gym. Okay.
And gym was with green, horrendous outfits.
Yeah.
They puffed at your knees like, and I was very bad at gym. Yeah. Very bad at gym. Anyway, those 3 items were my disaster there. Anyway, I graduated PS 189. So then. No, don't answer. Don't.
Okay.
And so then high school came, and we went to. Nobody went to high school. We all had to make a living. We didn't have enough money to run a family, so all these refugee kids were looking for jobs, all kinds of jobs. Whatever we could get, we grabbed. And when I was still in PS. I was.
PS was until 8th grade.
I was 14.
14. Yeah.
So we went to the George Washington Evening High School, and my father said to me, if you get all A's, then you go to day school. If you don't get all A's, you go to night school and go to work by day.
Okay.
I did not get all A's. I went to night school. And in the night school, we covered a nice curriculum. And I remember being in a class with what later turned out to be Rabbi Fulda. I don't think you ever heard of him, but he taught in Stern College. Doda Diane learned from him. And he was a very bright boy. And I remember the economics class they were trying to teach, and he got up in typical Jewish fashion, raised his hand and said, "But teacher, on page 259 on the second chapter, it distinctly says this, and this, and you are saying that, and that, and that." Well, you can imagine that went over very well.
Yeah.
And kids like that were in my class. Can you imagine? Oh dear. Anyway, so you can see that we didn't fit in too well. But evening school was different because we were all the same people. And I went to work, my first real job was in the diamond industry. And the diamond industry in the upper 40s, 1940s, was a going business, big business on 47th Street in Manhattan. And my father, Rabbi Soloveichik, said, well, if you're going to go to work, so I have connections. There are people in my shul that have such a factory, and you'll go to this factory, make some kind of money, and learn the trade. Right. The deal was that these people were going to teach me the trade, and I was going to make quite a bit of money, because that really made quite a bit of money. And these people were nice people, but they had no thought of teaching me anything. They wanted me to clean the house there and pick up the diamonds that fell through from the machines. Some would fall to the ground. And I was in charge of sweeping up into some kind of a netting device and picking out the diamonds. Okay. So this did not sit well with me for too long, and I quit, and I didn't tell my parents that I quit. But
and they were expecting you to contribute to the family.
But I will tell you what I did do. I went from door to door on 47th Street and knocked on the door and said, I am an expert sawyer. Will you hire me?
What's a sawyer?
A sawyer cuts the rough diamond into half. Right. For which you have to have a certain amount of real expertise. And I had no idea what I was doing. But I said I could do it, and they were so eager that this particular company said, okay, you do it. And now I was not yet 16 when this happened. And when you were 15 or 16 and under in New York, you had to go to a special school to finish your schooling, ki'ilu. And those schools were not populated by the nicest and finest clientele, by and large. But then we came along. And so my experience was 1 day a week. This was going to give me my education. 1 day a week, I was allowed to go to this school. And the minute they spotted me, all day long I ran and brought a petek from one teacher to the next. That's all I did all day, and that was my day at school.
Meantime, this was in addition to night school?
Yes, night school, this school, and working. And my mother, I would come home from work, maybe 5:30 from the subway. Yeah. And my mother would have a hot meal ready for me, and by 8 o'clock I was in school.
Wow.
Yes. So meantime, I'm busy knocking on doors to get a job behind my parents' back. And one of the companies said, okay, we'll train you. They saw right away I didn't know. It's 20 machines. Yeah. You couldn't possibly expect me to know it, really. And I was too young, really, to know it couldn't be. So they taught me. And I was a diamond sawyer for maybe 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And I want to explain also for the great-great-grandchildren that I got a little yellow envelope this big, and in it was my money. And I gave it over closed to my parents. I didn't look even.
You didn't look?
No,
you
I
don't
didn't.
Know what you made?
I did not know what I made. I handed it to my father. I just thought it would be good for you kids to know. And my father provided for my whatever I needed, wow. Of course. But in those days also, a nice dress cost $2. And a loaf of bread was, I think, 40 pennies, 40 pennies, yeah. Right. And so you can't go by,
the salary was $10.
Yeah, but even so, it's interesting to know. Right. So that was my main real job. And then when I got to be a little older, my father felt it was not possible for a frum girl to be working in a factory. Okay. So he said, you're going to be a ganenet. And with that, I became a ganenet. I know, it's funny. So, what was George Washington Night School? And in the summer in a Beis Yaakov seminary, learning Torah, not ganenet, I worked for Rabbi Dim of the 75th small shul, who had a gun below, like
Rabbi
shul.
Dim?
D-Y-M.
Okay,
Maybe
D-Y-M.
somebody will hear this and say, my relative.
Okay.
And no, he was.
I'm sorry.
He was not Dim.
No.
He was not Dim.
He
was a very
spelled it
clever
out.
man.
Okay.
And I was a gunman at Pitom. I had 20 kids under me, and I marched them.
This is what age?
18,
18?
something like 18.
Wow.
And I really took to it. I did very well with it. And this place, the rabbi's shul, was opposite Central Park. So one of my big activities for the children was to walk across Central Park. And Central Park had a zoo very close to where he was. And I was always a big zoo lover. I took them all to the zoo, and I will just tell you one hilarious, you can cut it all out if you don't like it.
No, I'm leaving it all in.
I took them in front of the ape, gorilla. And I'm explaining about the gorilla, and all my information comes from the little tab that's there, but they're too little to know, so I tell them about the gorilla. All of a sudden.
Okay. That didn't seem to faze you at all. He's stealing the show.
Did you see him?
Gosh, yeah, you see him.
He has to do his exercise. Yes. So this gorilla decided to spit on me.
Oh my God.
But, it was really a terrible thing. I mean, a gorilla doesn't have a little spittle. It's like major. And it went right on my hair. And I was standing there like the shock. And I had these 20 little chargers. I didn't want to scare them. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I put my entire head into one of the fountains of Central Park. It was just one of my many, exciting things happening to me. Anyway, I was a Ghanaian for quite a while because we're talking 18, right? Mm-hmm. And when I was 21, I was a very experienced Ghanaian, and I already had charge of a lot more children in the Syrian Jewish community, and I think Bayside. And my experience there was, it was a rather large group. I had a helper, very becovered already, and I made it my. I was a name, and I decided I must check out what the homes are like for each of my charges. So this whole Syrian community was in a very short area, and I went from place to place, and that's where I discovered that these people, their beautiful home was downstairs below the first level in the Martef, where most Americans had like a den.
Right.
They had these gorgeous carpets hanging on the wall, and they had their good stuff, silver and all that was down there. And on the main floor was a normal living quarter.
Okay.
Yeah, and I checked into, some of the children seemed to me not being treated well at home. I was worried about some of them, and I wanted to know what homes, and of course they were very gracious when I came. And I found out a few, today you call it abuse. Yeah. I mean, not the kind of abuse, not sexual abuse, are we allowed to say that word? But abuse, because they would lock the child into a dark cellar.
What?
And close the door, right? And how did I find that out? Because we were playing hide and seek once in this, this school had a whole building for me. Mm-hmm. It was a 2-story private little house. So we played hide and seek, and I couldn't find one child. And I was getting really very upset, but I had a helper, We looked all over. In the end, I found the child hidden in a cupboard, closed in a dark space. And that did not seem normal to me. And then I realized that's what happened. That's what they did when they didn't like the child or they didn't think it was behaving well. So you see, even in the 40s, those were not stories that hit the headlines,
Right.
but they existed the same as they do today. Anyway, this was my longest stretch before I got married, was being a ganennet. And meantime, I'd had many dates, because I got to be age where people do that.
Right.
I had a big chevra of nice guys that I hung around with. I went bike riding with them, ping pong playing. What did we do on dates? It wasn't a date. I went with a bunch of them. I didn't go with one.
Those were group dates.
Yes, you might say so. So one was like Carnegie Hall. They got us, they swindled, they got us in the back way and we climbed to the top floor, but we heard a nice symphony and orchestra. Then we went, okay, so we had to pay for ping pong, a nickel for an hour, and they treated me to a Coke.
Very nice.
Yes, but this was just like a whole group. I played against many and they played against me. Bike riding. We did all these very great things, outdoorsy or indoor, depending on weather. And I mean, that had to stop. My parents were getting very nervous. How long is she going to have this group here? And so I do
This
work.
is age 21.
22.
22.
Yeah. So I would say as of 22, I started to look at the people in a different way, like maybe marriage material, you know. And okay, should I tell you about how I met Saba?
Yes, please.
All right, so my father used to go around saying, Ich hab nicht kein Meure, ich hab Scheure. Translate, you know what?
Translate.
I will translate. I am not worried, I have schora tova.
Oh, okay.
And my mother used to tear her hair out and say, when is this girl gonna say she likes somebody?
Yeah.
So this went on for quite a while, and finally my mother persuaded my father, and he called up a long-lost cousin who was the Gizbar of Torah Vadas. Okay. I won't mention names. And he asked him to look around. You're in the Gizbar in Torah Vadas, there's got to be a guy there somewhere. So this Gizbar was close to Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. And he spoke to him about me, and he told him he's never seen me ever. And he told him what a beauty I was and how I could sing and dance and sew, all the things that I really didn't know how to do. And Rabbi Kamenetsky, who was, after all, a Godol Hador, said to himself, I want to see this girl.
Yeah.
And he agreed that he had somebody in mind for me. And he said, I want to see the parents. I want to see the home. And he went by subway a good hour, by himself. Nobody came in an entourage behind. He came all by himself. And my father, on the other side of the home, he had to persuade me to stay home one Sunday, because I was busy running around with this chevra. So I stayed home because my father begged me. And he said, I have a choshev guest. You have to help me. You have to serve a little tea. And then you could go. So I'm opening the door.
Oh, he didn't mention the purpose
No,
of the visit.
of course not. I would never have stayed
You would never
home.
have agreed.
No,
Oh, okay.
no. And I open the door, and there's this really cute little man with a long beard. I wasn't even used to seeing people with beards. And he was
It wasn't customary at that time?
No, not where I lived. And I let him in. I brought him to my father. I thought, I didn't know what to think. And my father said, now you could serve the tea. And the man, this lovely man, wouldn't eat anything. He had his own stuff he brought. And my father chatted with him. My brother was there also. And I didn't think anything of it. I figured 3 men. They want to talk to each other. I said, can I go now? After I was there maybe 10 minutes, not more. Yeah. And my father said, okay, you could go now. And I went off to my chevra. Yeah. And that was, I guess he was impressed not only by me, but by my father and my brother.
Probably, yeah.
Maybe he said, okay, she's not too bad. but the father, the brother, oh, that's something. So anyway, so that's,
they get rubbed off.
And it turned out to be that it was Saba. Yeah. So he was a pikiach of a man, and he understood to bring some nerd or fachnoket person to this home, it isn't going to work. Yeah. So he remembered Saba from Toronto, where he was. Mm. And Saba was his one of his doctors. So, and then Saba, okay, I didn't know what I didn't expect anything. Pit on this person calls me and says, I'm so-and-so, and I'm calling to speak to Hadassa, I think he said, Hilda. And I didn't like that right away, because I haven't been called Hilda in years by anybody. Oh. And my voice was sore from singing at the Hapoel HaMizrahi Shabbaton that I just came back from. And he thought I was a boy. So we started off in a good way. But soon it developed into a very long phone conversation. So we went out, and we went to see a movie called Rashomon.
Oh!
You remember that movie?
I've seen that.
Yeah, and both he and I could not take the tragedy of it all. And we started to giggle like stupid people. And this was like a real heavy-duty movie.
Yeah, it's very heavy.
And when we looked at each other, we said, we've got to get out. And we left. We left in the middle after the 3rd time that they were telling the same story from a different point of view. So we left, and that was the best part of it, because then we took a long ride into the country, and I guess we got to know each other, and I really liked him, and I trust he liked me also. But I went home and I knocked on my parents' door, and I said, if he asks me to marry him, I'll say yes.
After the first date?
After the first date.
Oh, wow. Oh,
well, you see, Hasidim have nothing on me.
Yeah, well,
And my parents woke up and said, after all the troubles that she gave us, and now she comes and tells us this. So the end was...
What age were you at this point?
24.
24. Oh, so your parents were really...
Yeah, my parents were ready. And really, I think I attribute this, in my case, to the fact that I really knew so many young men, and none of them really did it for me, so to say. And so probably it was by the process of figuring out what I really need, or what was good for me, or what I would like to be with in the long haul. And I think that's why I could make that statement.
Right, like a process of elimination.
So to say.
Yeah.
And so then what happened was Saba showed me his tochnit for the hospital, and he said, I want you to see it so that you don't feel bad. I cannot see you from one Motzei Shabbos to the next. And not only that, you can't call me. So can you imagine what that world would be like today if a girl would be a kala and she can't even phone.
How long did you date?
Oh, that's coming now.
Okay.
So
Wait, he told you this after the first date?
After the first date, he showed me the Tochnit.
Oh, okay.
I saw that he couldn't really speak to me or have time for me.
Okay.
I saw Motzei Shabbos was free, and so we went out second date. Second date, we went to a series of very good Shakespearean plays, very good, plus food, of course. You always have to eat.
Of course.
So this was a series. So second, third date, and even fourth, was the series of Hamlet, et cetera. Macbeth was really good. But don't think it was paying the full price. It was off Broadway.
I can't stress enough how off Broadway it was.
Right, and that was, well, I mean, he didn't have any money. He was a medical, he was already a doctor, but he was a resident.
He was a resident. Ah, okay.
He was a resident, and they don't make any money. So, and I didn't care. I didn't care at all. Yeah. I liked it. I thought it was nice, and then we went to all these, when I think about what fun we had, near not City College, the other college in New York, NYU. Near NYU, there were all these interesting Indian kosher, this kosher, that kosher, and we tried them all out. And they were all not edible, you should know. But they had a good name. Yeah. And mostly we went to something called Greener Pastures, which was a dairy, very good dairy restaurant. Not dairy, part of a restaurant.
Okay.
Anyway, so, okay, now comes my fifth date in the winter, and we're in the car, and Saba turns to me and he says, I have something serious to ask you. And I got so nervous that I opened the car door and threw up.
I forgot about that.
So what can I say? That kind of spoiled it for him. And he said, well, we'll try it next week. But you asked me how long it took me.
Oh my goodness.
Imagine, the fifth date, he was going to ask me to marry him, and I would have said yes, and I don't see him all week long. So everything I know about him is from the Motzei Shabbos, long, it's true they were long, but that's all I knew about him.
Wow.
And I did not, we talk about kids now. I have great-grandchildren that are standing at the cusp of getting married. All of them have so many this and that. I just did not have 1 minute of thinking, how is that going to be? How is that going to work out? Am I going to make it? Is it going to go through? None of that. It went just smooth silk. And I attribute it to being, friends with so many guys. I kind of took the measure of them, maybe. I really
you
can't.
had confidence that he was the right guy.
100%. Yeah. I just, it just was smooth as silk. But, all right, so the sixth date finally came, and I was invited to his bachelor pad near...
You came already with a bag, ready, just in case.
Beth Israel Hospital was where he was a resident, and all these guys that were residents, they had little rooms nearby. So then I went to see his pads. All he ever cooked for himself was steaks. But he was a pretty good cook, actually. And then I said yes. What is that? The rest is all of you are the rest.
Essentially.
Yes. So I don't know if we shouldn't maybe stop here, but you got a glimpse into refugees and what it was like, and for us it was actually relatively not that hard. But there were people. I will mention my friend, a good friend of mine to this day, whose father was a doctor in Germany, and he had to retake the medical test. What do you call it? Exam. Until that time, they had no money, and Mrs. I don't want to say her name. My friend's mother went out and cleaned public toilets. That's how she. And when I went to visit her for Shabbatot, which I did often, she had a refrigerator, and in the refrigerator, covered were 3 different complete meals, and it said Mr. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so. She took in roomers, and she made them their meals. And we were not allowed to open that refrigerator without her permission, because she was afraid to let the cold air leave.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I just want to say, and these were people, believe me, on a Ramah. Today you wouldn't meet these people there at Tzir. And she went and cleaned public toilets. Yeah. So we were not in that situation, but people were.
Yeah.
Yeah. They ran for their lives.
They ran for their lives, yeah.
Okay, that's enough.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. This was wonderful.
You can always cut out whatever you think is.
I'm going to leave it all.
I'm leaving it to Daniela. She has got her feet on the floor, and she will know what's too much.
Thank you very much.
Now we have tea and cake.